Hello, and welcome to the Trauma Treatment Collective vlog. Today we're going to be talking about ways to determine, is your trauma treatment effective? I think I'm not the only one when I have this question sometimes in my work. Is what I'm doing effective? Is it making a difference? Am I seeing any change in my client? What's really going on? I think it's easy sometimes in trauma treatment to get on what I like to call the fire department duty. And that's basically where you're putting out fires week after week. Every time a client comes in, they have something new that's going on. There's a new crisis that's happening. And this is an ongoing pattern. And so it's just what I call fire department duty. And so when you're thinking about what you're doing and whether it's effective, you can have a treatment plan. And I think we all have treatment plans. And I think that's good ethical treatment, is to have a guiding principle or a guiding plan to what you're doing. But sometimes those treatment plans sometimes can be very, I don't know what the word I want to use is, I guess, floaty or kind of surface level. And I think it's also good to have some guiding principles on the inside of you that you're looking at to think about whether what you're doing is effective. And so today I wanted to share with you 3 things that I would encourage you to consider when you're thinking about whether your trauma treatment is effective. Number 1 would be, are there patterns of stuckness in the nervous system? I teach a lot about working from a nervous system perspective, from a body-based perspective, and understanding not only just how trauma impacts the brain, but also how it impacts the body. And when I talk about is there stuckness in the nervous system, mainly what I'm talking about specifically is your client or are they struggling specifically with stuck patterns in fight, flight, and freeze? And so when I talk about fight, flight, and freeze, fight would be maybe they're constantly angry, or they're constantly kind of blowing up on people, or they're having a hard time managing their anger in situations. And a lot of times I'll tell clients it's this much anger should have been in the situation, but it's coming out like this much anger. And they can see it, other people can see it, and you can see it. And it's very identifiable that when they have a situation that triggers anger, it's too much and it's coming out too fast and they can't quite control it. And so that can be a strong fight response, or they can have a situation where they're stuck in their fight response. The other one would be a flee response or a flight response. I'll call it a flee response just for pronunciation issues, so you can make sure that you're following along with what I'm saying. But when you're talking about a flee response, you're talking about a client who just does not stay in the room. They're constantly fleeing, constantly kind of running away, constantly kind of getting out of situations that are stressful for them, feeling stressed and kind of just leaving. Whether they leave physically or they kind of leave more mentally, they are just not present a lot of the times. So they have a very strong flee response. Or they may have a very strong freeze response, which means that they are not advocating for themselves. They're not standing up in situations and circumstances. They're very passive, very docile, very overly meek in situations where they are constantly kind of blending in with the pain and hoping that the situation passes by. That might be an indication that there's a very strong freeze response going on. And so when you're working with clients, you really want to help them identify where they're stuck and how to kind of move through that stuckness. That's a great way for you to also be able to identify if what you're doing is effective. If you start to see some of that lift a little bit based on where they're stuck, and you start to see more movement in those areas, so maybe they were more frozen and they had a very strong freeze response, you're starting to see them advocate for themselves, speak up for themselves, do things that are more catered to what they need, and identifying their needs and verbalizing their needs, and all of those kinds of things could be indication that a client is moving forward. And so you can look at each response and kind of identify what would be things that you'd like to see for that client to be able to do. And these are the small shifts also. I think it's important with trauma treatment to not look for those big swings in behavior. And so if they are super stuck in one area, then not looking for them to be super unstuck in that area. But we're looking for those small shifts towards unstuckness. Those small shifts towards being able to move in the right direction shows that they're moving and it's more sustainable, because those big sweeping changes sometimes can be things that clients can't sustain over long periods of time because it hasn't had time to really organized in their system, and it hasn't had time to really be incorporated into the way that they do things. And so situations and circumstances come up and they kind of revert back to old behavior. So those small shifts have time to kind of settle in and become a part of the way the client works, and they're able to process them and integrate them, and so therefore they're able to sustain them and keep kind of moving forward. So that's the first thing, is kind of looking at where is a client stuck, and then identifying in those different areas of stuckness what would be kind of some signs and behaviors that would indicate that they're moving towards being more unstuck in those different defense responses. The second thing would be, where are they in the protocol and flow? So I am a big proponent of having a protocol and flow in treatment, especially trauma treatment. So there's a certain way that I do trauma treatment with each of my clients. How that pans out and what that looks like for each of my clients may be different, but usually I'm running the same protocol and the same flow. And I actually call it the three-prong approach to trauma treatment, that I teach in my online trauma treatment course called Treating Trauma with the Brain and Body in Mind. The next actual registration or open enrollment will be in September, but I go in depth into this three-prong approach that I use, but I'm encouraging you to have some kind of flow and some kind of protocol to how you treat trauma. And that's a good way to also be able to identify how to know if what you're doing is effective. So when you're thinking about where a client is, you can kind of say, okay, we're here, and the next step is to get here. Are we moving towards that, or are we moving away from that, or are we stuck in a certain phase of treatment and that we need to figure out why we're stuck, or if we need to go back to a certain phase of treatment? All of that is really important, and having a protocol and a flow to how you do it will help you track where a client is and where they need to go and what you need to do to kind of get them there. But if you don't have a protocol or a flow to treatment, you could be all over the place. And a lot of times, if we follow our client's lead, we will end up all over the place because they come in very, very scattered and very chaotic. And so it's really important that we put some structure around them so that they can kind of move forward in a good direction. I will link to that online course that I mentioned, Treating Trauma with the Brain and Body in Mind, where I talk about my protocol, my flow to trauma treatment. I'll link that in the description section so you can read a little bit more about that. And you can also consider joining me in September when enrollment opens again for that course. And then the third thing is looking at your capacity, looking at your client's capacity to handle things that maybe they couldn't handle when they first came into session. That's another great way of being able to track whether your trauma treatment is effective, is being able to look at a client's capacity. So as we talk about hard things, are they able to maintain more? Are they able to regulate more? Are they able to have more capacity for harder emotions and feelings and all of those kinds of things? You really want to kind of just constantly check in to see where a client's capacity is as we continue to touch base on a hard situation or something that has happened in their life that they're processing. This will help you identify as a client continues to process and integrate their capacity to sustain or to hold big emotions or to be able to talk about hard things should increase as they are continuing to integrate that trauma into their life and into their system. They should be able to have more ability to kind of be in that place. So that's another way to kind of think about it. So these are three things that you can consider. Number one is being able to talk about patterns of stuckness with their defense responses. Their defense responses are fight, flee, and freeze. So looking for those and looking for movement in those. Then the second thing is having a protocol or flow to trauma treatment, and being able to assess where a client is will also help you with effectiveness of your trauma treatment. And third, the third thing I would share with you is the capacity piece, and checking in to see if a client's capacity is increasing to hold the hard emotion about something that has happened in their life that they're processing. So making sure that you are staying connected to that and checking in with that will also. So the more we can help clients stay on track with their trauma treatment, and the more we can have things that are going to help them to stay on track and ideas and thoughts about how to keep them on track, the easier it's going to be for clients to not get derailed in treatment or overwhelmed. When we think even about whether it's effective, another thing that when trauma treatment is not effective, it can cause clients to be re-traumatized. So this is also another great reason why you want to avoid not being able to assess whether your trauma treatment is effective. So I hope this is helpful for you, and thank you for joining me, and I hope you will join me again next week. Take care.